Limits of the Flesh, Chapter 94, Fantasy Fiction by Azazyel. Loki winded himself back up to try to smash me again with Thor's hammer Mjölnir. Still, as he strained himself in doing so, I grimly smiled as the blood vessels in his eyes burst. He choked out blood as finally I allowed my Phenex bloodline to get to work fully, and after a couple moments combined with my biomancy, I was fully restored with my scales audibly popping back into place as I chuckled loudly. Hahaha. Yes, Loki, seeing you swinging that hammer like Thor, I decided to entertain you in a physical battle, but I see that you let the hammer get to your fucking head. As my blood is a most poisonous thing in this damned reality. I had the primordial blood of some cultivator bullshit unicorn that was my gift in starting out in this universe. And that dumbass had happily slammed his hand into my eye and gotten plenty of blood caked into his skin. However unwillingly he did it. He still got my blood across his face and mouth, and I certainly wasn't willing to share my blood with him, so the curse of the unicorn struck him deeply as his pale skin visibly began shriveling up like old leather, and to add insult to injury, the spinning Dharma wheel of Mahorga above my head spun as he tried to slam Mjölnir into me again, but instead a magical grid of octagons formed to block the divine weapon. This is Mjölnir. A reflexive magical glyph cannot block it. Loki howled, and I almost looked at him with pity before I looked over at Odin's still corpse, and I shook my head. And then he vomited a mouthful of thick chunky blood that was filled with his organs breaking down from within. With Mjölnir slipped out of his hands with a death-ringing clanging noise that made the would-be terrorist's heart shudder as Fenrir also visibly began succumbing to the bite wounds and toxins I filled him with as well. I looked at the rest of the magicians and brainwashed sacred gear wielders, and with Chow Chow, Loki, Fenrir, and the old Satans already dead, there was no leader that could stop EI, and the rest of my creations, plus the other faction warriors, from dealing with the rest. So I flew over to Odin's body where Rosweiss was standing guard to make sure no one would desecrate his body. Leaving Loki to collapse on the ground next to Fenrir as he died, with his body visibly thinning and melting from within itself, leaving only the skin behind as his blood, organs, and everything else leaked out of his body. Coming down on one knee, I asked respectfully, "Rosweiss, may I at least restore his body?" Rosweiss looked away from her charge for a moment, and I held in a grimace as she looked utterly devastated, and I realized that as Odin's bodyguard, this was really fucked up and bad for her. And I doubted the Norse would care about her excuse that Loki was disguised as one of Odin's soldiers, and then after bashing Odin over the head with Thor's hammer, Rosweiss didn't have much she could do when said hammer threw Odin's body all but directly into Fenrir's fangs to be mulched. But Rosweiss shook her head slowly as her hollow voice echoed out, "No. He died a warrior's death, let him go as he is, as his soul has already left." To which I nodded as I could feel Odin's soul was literally long gone. Suspiciously long gone, more like, as I couldn't even sense his soul using the Grail, and thus I knew Odin himself didn't want me to fiddle fuck with his soul. I took a breath and I looked outwards at the magicians that managed to survive my creations, and the likes of Graphia and Gabriel, with those obviously fleeing via forceful teleportations, at seeing how it was suicidal to stay here with their leaders being dead, as they had no way to get past the barrier made by Michael, Azazyel, and the other leaders who were protecting the civilians who were working at the casino. And with Chow Chow dead and George having fucked off at realizing I was killing everyone and cutting the hero faction's losses, I was at a bit of a loss as to what to do now, as I stood up and made some distance as the fighting died down and some Norse soldiers came out with a stretcher to collect Odin's remains. "Well, that all happened," I muttered as I sat down in the suite the devils were given, as my creations were working to clean up Medusa as she had gotten messy in her fighting, and it wasn't a good look for someone to be covered in all the body fluids of their brutally slain foes during peace talks. Hearing my words, Graphia snorted and said bluntly, "We were all well aware many people wouldn't take this peace summit well. Truthfully, I am surprised factions other than the human and Loki's dissident Norse didn't get involved with how the new Satans are gone." I nodded as I myself was a bit curious, but I shrugged and said evenly, "I imagine the hell jungle I made that decimated the Greeks also plays a part in the other factions not wanting to fuck with us." After saying that, however, I did continue, "But the devils aren't weak even now. The younger generation has great potential, and the older generation can still hold the fort while the younger grow into their power." I spoke before looking at Graphia and saying with a wry smile, "Plus, No faction will dare throw their lesser warriors and mages at us, as only a faction leader can hope to keep me busy for long. Out of all the faction leaders of this world, including the likes of the Trimurti, Zeus and his siblings, or the ever-absent Shinto faction, I knew for a damned fact that when it came to killing the most amount of people, I was the perfect walking war crime, so no faction would go to war with the devils and by extension the fallen, and the normal angels before killing me. So until I died, the Abrahamic faith was safe from all-out war. Besides, the Olympians wouldn't invade the devils anymore, seeing as we made peace in having me marry Artemis, and with the Siscon Apollo dead. Either way, I brushed my hands down my face as I wanted to scream into a pillow, and after a moment I decided to do just that as I picked up Graphia beside me, and then with a flapping noise I went face first into her exposed cleavage and began a muffled scream into her unholy beautiful breasts, making Graphia chuckle with fond exasperation.